delighted to welcome Daniel Rachel and Andrew Harrison talking about the Rock Against Racism concert in Victoria Park. So, thank you.
Thank you for having us. So, we're on one mic to replicate the DIY vibe. Peters and Lee. So, welcome. I'm Andrew Harrison, and I want to ask first one important question. Did anybody go to the Rocket? Here we go. Oh, this is fantastic. I was expecting to get like one person who would say, yeah, I went. This is great. Oh, we'll keep it tight because we want to ask you guys about it later because this is fantastic how people actually went. More recently, did anybody venture into the West End yesterday for reasons maybe protest or otherwise? Anybody go in? Yeah. I don't know about you, but I was quite cheered to see how few turned up for Tommy Robinson's event. Last time around, it was estimated by the police to get 150,000. This time, police estimated 60,000. Other people estimated they got as few as 35,000. Tommy Robinson, of course, says he got 1 million. But it looks like it was not anywhere near the event that he wanted it to be. And I found that very encouraging because we have, yes, clap at that. And a round of drum roll as well. Fantastic, yeah.
Tin drum,
yeah. Don't say that. But so good. But we can't be complacent because there is no doubt that we're in the middle of the most sustained and dangerous period of extreme right agitation in almost 50 years, probably longer. And unlike in the 1970s, when the National Front would routinely get about 15% as their peak, the representatives of the far right are now making serious inroads into political power, and it's frightening. So, unlike in the 1970s, we have been here before though. The last time far-right and fascistic violence spread out into British streets, the world of music and youth culture responded in a way we're still talking about today. They were alarmed by the rise of the National Front. They were alarmed by Eric Clapton's infamous onstage rants in Birmingham, where he said that Enoch Powell was right to keep Britain white. I used to be into dope, now I'm into racism. Don't boo me, I'm not Eric Clapton. And also by David Bowie's cocaine-addled flirtations with Nazism. I believe very strongly in fascism. He said rock stars are fascists too. Adolf Hitler was one of the first rock stars. This produced a strong and a unified reaction from music fans and political activists who began to put on gigs and anti-racist carnivals, mixing punk, dub, funk, ska, alternative rock, bringing black and white music fans together under the banner of Rock Against Racism. They put on more than 500 concerts across the UK, and bands didn't just play the gigs. Acts like Misty and Roots, Gang of Four, The Ruts, Tom Robinson and The Beat were part of organising the tour. You might even call it Praxis. Say Praxis and Hackney, you always get a thumbs up. And it all culminated in the reason that we're here, 30th of April 1978, when 100,000 music fans, including people in this room, marched from Trafalgar Square via Cable Street, very significantly, to Victoria Park, right in the centre of Hackney, and in the National Front's East End power base. The bill, obviously, famously included The Clash, X-Ray Spex, Steel Pulse, and Jimmy Percy. Victoria Park's significance is possibly not as fully recognised as it ought to be. It was one of those very few events that really did change the course of pop culture, making it clear that whatever music was about, it was not the property of the far right. So what did the Rock Against Racism Carnival actually in Victoria Park achieve, and how are its effects still being felt? A man who knows is Daniel Rachel, the author of Walls Come Tumbling Down, The Music and Politics of Rock Against Racism, Tone Red Wedge, as well as This Ain't Rock and Roll, Pop Music, The Swastika and the Third Reich. We are delighted to have him here. Round of applause, Daniel Rachel. Daniel, I mean, the most striking thing from the point of view of 2026 is that grassroots music could do such a thing and on such a scale. You look at the world of music now and you kind of think, irrespective of political lines, it's hard to get something together like this. I was a bit young for it, you were definitely too young for it. Sum up, if you just give us the summary of how important it was and how it did change things.
Oh, well, it was important enough that I remember when I was 8 years old and living in Birmingham, we drove inadvertently into the middle of a National Front march in Digbeth. Right. It was the night the Clash were playing Barbarellas. And I vividly remember seeing thousands of right-wing skinheads, Union Jacks, and mum in the front of the car screaming. And I think that was my introduction to the politics of the late 1970s, and that's quite an impressionable thing to see as a young kid. And within probably a year of that, I've seen two-tone on television, and the idea that black and white could come together culturally in music, and just by the mere act of creating together could make a statement. So that was really powerful. But as you rightly say, you know, my local gig was the Birmingham Odeon, and Eric Clapton stood up on stage, and over the course of the evening he asked and I excuse my language here, but he asked the coons and the wogs to identify themselves and then told them to get back home. His language was utterly deplorable across that night, and it was a whole night of stuff. And what I endeavoured to do when I wrote this book was, because I'm obviously too young to experience it in the way that many of you experienced it, I decided to try and find the people that were at the heart of this story and tell them to tell me their story and bring it together. And in Birmingham on that night, there were several people. One of them was Dave Wakeling, who would go on to form The Beat. And he was down the front of that gig and described the feeling of being a brummie and being told that his fellow compatriots, his friends, his workmates, who were Asian, were black, were not welcome in this country. And he said there were murmurs down the front that this wasn't acceptable. And of course the significance of Eric Clapton doing that at the Birmingham Odeon is literally a cross over the High Street, which is where Enoch Powell at the Midland Hotel delivered the Rivers of Blood speech in 1968 and called for the voluntary repatriation of people that had come to support and rebuild Britain after the war to leave the country. And he articulated that again in 1976. And as you rightly say, David Bowie, I wouldn't excuse it like you excused it by cocaine. David Bowie had been making overtures about Hitler from 1968, as did Rod Stewart within a couple of years, as did many rock stars. And David Bowie's deep interest in the swastika, in the Third Reich, lasts at least 13 years to my knowledge. That includes owning Goebbels' desk. Now I ask you, what got signed at that desk, you know? And his interest gets often excused as a cocaine mindset. Now that's a lot of years. I've taken cocaine for certain points in my life, and I can tell you that it didn't make you like Hitler. That we know of. It didn't make Winston Churchill wave a Nazi flag and do a salute, or various other people, or Stephen Fry, who were bipolar, and so what a guy called Red Saunders, who was working for cartoon clowns. He was in the theatre, he was middle class, working for theatre. Somebody says in the book that Red Saunders, this big guy with a big attitude, was the kind of guy that would chuck down seeds. And not everything would flower, but Rock Against Racism did. And he did it by a very old-fashioned method by today's standards, which he just simply wrote a letter. And he sent it to 4 newspapers, Music Papers, Socialist Worker. And it got printed. And within that letter, he called out Bowie, and he called out Clapton, and he called out Rod Stewart, and he said, we need a rank and file movement against the poison, I'm paraphrasing this, in rock music. And if you agree, right back to Rock Against Racism.
Well, the letter is really powerful. I've got a bit of it here. He addresses Clapton directly in the letter. He says, own up, half your music is black, you're rock music's biggest columnist. You're a good musician.
Colonialist.
Yep. That's what it's. Actually, I think that's what they. But maybe the subs change it to that. But he says you're a good musician, but where would you be without the blues and R&B? You've got to fight the racist poison. Rock was and still can be a real progressive culture, not a package, mail order, stick-on nightmare of mediocre garbage. That's pretty.
There's a really powerful letter, and it got printed, and he urged people to write, and people wrote back. They bothered to get a pen and a paper, they bothered to get an envelope, they bothered to put P.O. box on it, they bothered to buy a stamp. They wrote back and said, whatever you're doing, we support you. And then suddenly Rock Against Racism started getting phone calls. Red tells a great story about somebody like this young lad from Aberystwyth phoned up Rock Against Racism. My teacher's a fascist, what should I do? We need Rock Against Racism in Aberystwyth. And Red said, you are Rock Against Racism at Aberystwyth, do it! And that was the spirit, just do it. We don't own it. That was really important about Rock Against Racism. You had an idea, you wanted to fight the fascists, the neo-Nazis, do it. And they would send out badges and they would send out forms how to put on a gig, send you stickers, posters, whatever you needed, Rock Against Racism. And it grew out of a little committee of just 5 people. And they inspired the country. And that went from small gigs, in whether it was in Birmingham, in London, in Edinburgh, in Runcorn, in Bangor, wherever. It grew and it grew to where within 2 years, less than 2 years, they said, we're going to do a carnival. A carnival as in celebration. We're going to mark the 10th anniversary of the Paris Uprising, and we're going to put on a gig in Victoria Park.
Well, before we come and talk about Victoria Park, there's lots of strange kind of cultural currents going on at this time. And one of them is, as Ruth Gregory, as one of the original Rock Against Racism activists, pointed out, the early punk movement actually could have gone either way. There was a lot of flirtation with fascism. Rock Against Racism comes out of the punk DIY ethic, comes out of the fanzines, comes out of the music press. But also, you see, Susie Sue with a swastika armband, you see Sid Vicious and swastika t-shirts. You see a lot of, we were just talking before we started about the imagery on the front of the first Joy Division, I think it's like Sniff Kitten's record, taken from Nazi illustration. It could have gone either way.
Yeah.
And Rock Against Racism is the thing that kind of ensures it doesn't, is it?
No, I mean, this is really important because even the Clash were in question. What does white riot mean? Specifically, I was just chatting to a lady earlier, saying in Walls Come Tumbling Down, it was really important to me that this wasn't just going to be the voices of white people. And I spoke to maybe over 100 people for this book, and many of them are women. That was really important to get women's voices into the story because they're often neglected. It was also really important to get black voices into the story. Voices of the Linton Kwesi Johnson or Dennis Bavell or the members of Steel Pulse and Misty. And what was interesting about this was, I was just saying to wherever she is, but I was just saying that, hello, I was just saying that a lot of black people were going, racism's a white problem, you deal with it, this isn't for us. You sort yourselves out, and they were very resistant. Linton was very resistant. Major force at the time, but a lot of them came round to it because they realised what was going on and wanted to get involved and make the changes that happen. I've just completely lost the strand of where you were focusing my thoughts.
Well, just on
sorry?
The Clash, white right.
Yeah, of course. And so people go, what does white right mean in this context? The other context alongside culture is the context of what's actually happening on the streets, exactly or not dissimilar to what we're seeing now, which is the National Front formed in 1967 and then incrementally begin to gain at the polls in local elections, and by 1977-78 they are promising to stand an MP in every constituency across the country. That will give them the right to broadcast on national television. So the street fights going on in Wood Green, for example, in Lewisham, and then suddenly you've got bands saying white riot. People didn't know which side you were on.
Yeah.
And it needed Rock Against Racism, amongst other people, to bring that message home. And they did it through a fantastic fanzine. And I call it a fanzine, but it opened out into a poster. It was a big thing called temporary hoarding. And if you went to a RA gig, you bought temporary hoarding, and temporary hoarding had the politics. The politics you could read about, discuss, understand histories. But the gigs were about making visual statements and about having a great time and music. And that was where it was. So when Rock Against Racism invited the Clash to perform, the Clash wanted to be, not just because they wanted to fight racism, this is also about anti-Semitism, because like Mick Jones said, the guitarist of the Clash, he said, this repatriation, I'm half Jewish. Is which half of me are the National Front going to send back to Lithuania?
Yeah.
It's a
I mean,
great-
years
it's a great
later,
question.
there's a fantastic Mick Jones Big Audio Dynamite song called Beyond the Pale,
Yes.
literally referring to the Pale of Settlement. I
Yes.
only discovered recently that the lyrics were written for Mick by Joe.
That's exactly
so
right.
Joe is kind of like writing for his friend that he's trying to reconnect with.
And that pale is the story of Fiddler on the Roof.
Yeah.
The community of Jewish people is beyond where they're allowed to live, and then the forces will come, and that's where Mick Jones's family is from, the pogroms of the late 1800s, early 1900s. His family belonged to those pogroms that made him. So he was part of that story too, as Terry Hall was, who used to wear a Star of David whenever he performed with the Specials, and Pauline Black, who was half Jewish. So that story is woven into it too.
Yeah.
But the alliance between Rock Against Racism and a year later, in 1977, in the autumn of 77, was the formation of the Anti-Nazi League, of which Neil Kinnock was part of that formation, and Peter Hain. And what they did was really important, because they provided an infrastructure. They weren't cultural, which is what everybody told me concerned with this, but they could provide infrastructure, posters, leaflets, badges in the millions, and that was hugely significant when Rock Against Racism, who were kind of just people that wanted to do good but didn't really know how to do it, except like, let's put some music on, let's make a record, let's have a barge, let's do this. How do we do it? I don't know, that's the Anti-Nazi League now, they're involved.
Yes.
And they were able to put that out quite significantly, and so that was really important. And hearing those voices and speaking to them was really exciting to hear how the message could permeate throughout Britain.
Now, there's another thing happening as well, not just in the kind of the political confluence. The sort of the tides of music are coming together in a really beneficial way, aren't they? Because reggae had obviously had, decades of pre-existence, rocksteady, dub, ska, all that stuff through the late 1960s. But as punk is coming to public attention, reggae is kind of rising at the same time, and all of the key punks love reggae, don't they? Lydon is like a big dub guy. The Clash, obviously, produced by Lee Perry. And it's like, not only can they articulate the idea that maybe, black and white people could get together and enjoy themselves in the same place, but the music is demonstrating it. The bands are experimenting back and forth. The great reggae bands and British reggae bands singing about British, experience.
The important thing is that when British citizens were invited back to the motherland at the end of the war to help renew Britain, they laid down roots and had kids, obviously.
Yeah.
And the first generation, second generation of those kids went to the same schools as British kids, and they began to mix in schools and in youth centres. And obviously, if you mix, you start sharing records, you start checking out each other's clothes. So it's natural that
and this is where you get UB40, isn't it? Where you've got the Campbell brothers, whose dad's a folk singer, Irish
Ian
folk
Campbell,
singer, and mixing with West Indian kids at school. Everybody is friends with everybody else. Everybody's sharing all of their records, and actually it does connect to the fact that reggae itself has kind of very, very deep roots in Scottish and Irish folk because of the transmission of music back and forth. It's like, and so ironically, the world's biggest reggae band becomes a mixed black and white band from Birmingham. Which you would not.
Oh, Boston!
There you go. Yeah.
And I mean, it worked both ways. That did, in that, when I spoke to David Hines, the key songwriter and singer in Steel Pulse, he said, I grew up on English pop, listening to the Kinks and the Beatles, the Stones, and that was infiltrated. And when you listen to Steel Pulse, they're not playing obvious kind of early ska rocksteady of Jamaica. They're putting in kind of unusual chords which they've got from English pop. Likewise, when you go to the English punk bands, because they're growing up hearing this kind of music from their mates, so it's natural that they start introducing things like Police and Thieves into the Clash there, and introducing other rhythms and ideas into their music. So there's this natural harmony. And then Rock Against Racism have a very, very simple idea, and that idea is that whenever they put on a gig, within about a year or so, they decide to put on a punk band which is going to be invariably white, and they're going to put on a reggae band, which is invariably going to be black. And then the two of them would do their set, and at the end of the night, they would do what's called the jam. And the jam was an invitation for members of both bands to come on stage. Now that is massive and a radical statement, because in the late 70s, black people invariably did not go to white gigs and vice versa. There's obviously exceptions, but to bring them together and see them on stage was huge. And then when Two Tone happens by 1979, Rock Against Racism are just going, this is amazing, because rather than us trying to bring them together, here arrive the Selector and the Beat and the Specials, and they've done it within the bands.
Yeah.
And so it moves on another level, which is, you know, we take that for granted for now, but that taking for granted is hugely important.
Yeah.
In the same way as, you know, the representation at the Carnival in 78 of Tom Robinson performing Glad to Be Gay, and the idea that he got a massive crowd of 80,000 singing along to sing If You're Glad to Be Gay. Now that idea of being gay is very different in 78 as it is to now in 2026.
Absolutely anathematised and considered to be like dangerous. And
so we can celebrate that, can't we? We can celebrate that move forward. We can celebrate the idea that it doesn't look unusual to have a black and white kids in the same band as one another.
Well, let's talk about the day. Let's talk about the carnival, 30th of April 1978. You just explained how we kind of came to it and how it's like they decided they were going to have a thing on the anniversary of the 1968 uprising. Why Hackney? Why Victoria Park?
It was the forgotten place in many respects. Bring an injection of culture back into Hackney was part of the idea, and they lived in Hackney, and they got permission from the council with a few bottles of Remy Martin given to the park keeper. So they literally did. They put his arm around him, took him around the back of the swimming pool, kind of fed him. The Who provided the PA. And they decided to do a march from Victoria,
By the way, let's just check. Who did the march as well as the gig? This is incredible.
As I'm sure you'll testify later, the march was amazing because it was going to be celebration. It was going to have flatbed trucks. Bands were going to play on the trucks, and they did as the march went 7 miles. It was going to have whistles, which they did. Virgin Records got a ton of whistles, so it was going to be noisy. Got paper mache heads made up by the people that went on to make Spitting Image of John Tyndale, who led the British movement, then the National Front, and Martin Dudar from the National Front as well. Yeah. Swear words are allowed here. and it was this incredible, and people said, nah, nobody will march 7 miles. And they did, but the thing is they wanted to get to the music, so it moves fast. And there's great stories, you know, Billy Bragg tells great stories, Red tells a great story where they go past the Bladebone pub, which is the neo-Nazi stronghold. And at first they come out and they're Sieg Heiling, Sieg Heil, Sieg Heil to all the anti-fascists, and then, you know, along come another few hundred and another few thousand, and it's like Sieg Heil, back in the pub they go, and off they go, and there's great banners for, you know, support for all kind of minorities, and then the great story is that from the other end, you know, there's some of Ra. They've been they tell a story where they're making cheese and butter sandwiches, and they pile them up in Red Saunders' bath like the night before, because they're going to feed everybody, fill up the bath.
Is that sanitary? I don't know. Anyway.
But the people in the park, it's like, tumbleweed, nothing's happening. And X-Ray Spex about to go on, and then she does come out, polystyrene, you know, and she comes out with the famous, you know, the beginning of...
What, of Bondage Up Yours?
Yeah. So go on.
I can't remember that one.
Little girls should be seen and not heard, but I say, oh, bondage up yours! And at that moment, the march comes into the park, and it just comes in droves of thousands and thousands, and the whole thing explodes. So you get this incredible atmosphere, which I'm sure loads of you have seen on film. And so X-Ray Spex, and then you get Patrick Fitzgerald, who makes the great mistake of using an acoustic guitar, and like Billy Bragg said, if only he'd done electric, he would have nailed it, you know.
It's Dylan in reverse.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Judas
acoustic.
Judas buttons.
And then Steel Pulse,
Yes.
which apparently when they donned the robes of the Ku Klux Klan, which they did as an incredible statement, you could hear a pin drop in the audience. And then then the big shenanigans start. This is, you know, an exciting part of the book when the Clash have got to finish on time to allow the Tom Robinson band to play, who have had a top 10 hit. So and there's been a whole thing that the Clash, are they going to do it? Are they not going to do it? It's why the Clash aren't on the poster, because they won't decide until the last moment or 2 weeks before. And then they play over time. So Tom Robinson's getting really angsty because he sees his set going smaller and smaller. But of course, you know, as you mentioned, Jimmy Percy, Sham 69, who's really flirted on both sides here. You know, he wants to appease his audience, which means allowing, you know, right wingers into his gigs and left wingers, and he thinks he can speak to both because he's, in his eyes, they're working class, and he can do something with it. But he comes and performs White Riot, and you know, you see the footage from the film Rude Boy, the Clash film, and it's just incredible. You know, just far as the eye can see, you know, great.
Yeah, I mean, the mix of acts, you know, Steel Pulse, Clash, X-Ray Spex, Tom Robinson Band, this is kind of, it's Red Wedge, you know, in embryo, isn't it? It's what's going to happen in the 80s. It's kind of, you know, the setting up the idea that, like, this is what alternative music is all about, and actually it's going to be more powerful than the kind of lame mainstream. It's going to...
Well, it's a really interesting parallel to make this, because all the people that were radicalised from Rock Against Racism and those people that went on to be at Greenham and C&D rallies and animal welfare, miners' strike, would all coalesce again with Red Wedge, with a view to trying to persuade a young generation to register to vote and hopefully vote against Margaret Thatcher at her third attempt to win a general election in the Conservative Party. But what the marked difference between those two movements is Rock Against Racism works outside of Parliament. Red Wedge, to my knowledge, is the only time in the history of rock and roll where musicians attempt to change the country through the statute book. Which is a whole other story, and they do actually succeed, and it's quite it's really interesting parallel to say, how do we change the country culturally? Do we do it by protest, by having fantastic events, or do we do it by getting the law of the land changed? And you can see on both hands really what works and doesn't work. We can learn from history in terms of now where it played, you know, both ways.
Yeah, I mean, the event was described by many people.
5 minutes, probably.
Yeah, okay, I'm going to tighten this up, because I definitely want to get some of the people who were there up here to tell us what they experienced.
Up here?
If you fancy it. Why not? Well, I mean, put up a shelf in the back where nobody can hear.
Nobody asks questions then, you'll get statements forever.
No, I just want to ask people what it was like. I mean, from today's perspective, it is almost unbelievable that it happened at all. It kind of, it's hard to sort of imagine something like this being put together completely by amateurs, completely on a fanzine DIY point of view. Old guys, like often my generation, like to complain that, you know, the politics has gone out of music. Music doesn't engage with politics the way that it used to. And it doesn't engage the way that it used to. It engages in other ways by enabling and ensuring that people from, you know, as many different communities, backgrounds as possible can participate and can be the A-list. But I've got to ask, I mean, where do the echoes of Rock Against Racism exist now? Because a lot of people would say you really need something like this right now.
Well, you can never replicate a time, because a time is all about all the conflicting elements of society and politics within an orbit of time and space, and that's what makes things happen. So to even want to replicate is to my mind is the wrong approach. Whatever the circumstances of a particular time and period will create what is necessary, I think, and that, you know, I think, you know, if you speak to any young kid that now, that has concerns, whatever their concerns is, then they'll say how they are radicalised and what their influences are. And for a lot of those people, it is music. So I think we just have to be careful, just because we're from different generations, that we diminish or the spirit and momentum of a new generation doing it in their way, to be honest.
I mean, in a lot of ways, you know, contemporary music is the realisation of what Rock Against Racism and Two-Tone were about.
And Love Music, Hate Racism is literally the continuation of Rock Against Racism, because that's their statement. They take it and are using it today. So, you know, it's there, but in different ways. And like you said before, you know, it may be that we don't just find it by all watching Top of the Pops one night, or watching or reading the same newspapers or music magazines. It's splintered how we find it. But in the same way, social media can garner probably people in greater ways than ever it did in how Ra did it.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before we started recording. Daniel does not run across these people on social media because he's very lucky. I do occasionally run across like this bizarre creature, which is I grew up on punk and the Jam and Two-Tone, and I'm voting Reform. And those people do exist. It's like, and you kind of think, how can that possibly be? You clearly haven't listened to the records or paid attention, but people are able to exercise this cognitive dissonance in their heads, and it's really troubling. And I don't know what you do about it. It's kind of, you know,
people will always divorce music from what it is. You know, it's the same. You know, the Specials had to deal with neo-Nazis and right-wingers at their gigs, as did all the Two-Tone bands, Body Snatchers, Selected Beat. You know, and they could never understand it then, that they would kind of give Zeke Hiles and spit and throw coins at people and then dance when the music started.
I don't know how Terry Hall dealt with it, because I saw the Specials at what we've just established was their last gig in Liverpool, and they were performing Why, which has got the refrain with a Nazi salute and a steel cap boot, tell me why. And a small but loud section of the audience, it's like, see, can't run away. Terry stops the song and goes, if that's all you can do with your right arm, we're going to cut the fucking thing off. And that really shut them off. And it was kind of like, sometimes just to be directly confrontational.
Just as we get to the end, there's a brilliant story in the Two-Tone book about Uxbridge, when they were getting a similar thing, and the Specials put down their instruments, jumped off the stage, and chased the fascists out of the room. Imagine that.
I mean, battering your own audience, I mean, a section of the audience, it's a bold move. I don't know, maybe it works. I mean, well, look, I think we're on exactly 10 minutes till we have to stop. We should do some questions, but I think we really should get some personal experiences. So raise your hand if you went to the Rock Against Racism show again. Right. Okay, so what's your name?
I'm Valerie.
Tell us your experience at the event.
I was only 7 years old though, but my brother was a Rastafarian at the time, and he was 19, and I knew it was something big because he never took me anywhere. So we went to Victoria Park, and I just remember there were, to me, thousands and thousands of people, and I was dressed in a Two-Tone outfit. I'm very smart, thank you. And I remember lots of people taking our photographs, because again, my brother was about 6'2", dreadlocks, and there's me in my Two-Tone outfit as a little kid just eating sweets. I didn't know the significance of it, but I was there.
Were you Hackney's tiniest rude girl?
Yeah!
You're 7 years old, and I don't know if you've been to gigs at all. Could you see anything? Did you have any musical memories of it?
I just remember the reggae bands. I mean, like I said, my brother was Rastafarian, so that was why we went along, I guess. But just remember all the reggae fans and just everyone just coming together and singing all the songs. But yeah, I was too busy just eating sweets because I was too young, you know.
The correct attitude. Thank you very much. Anybody else? Who else wants? Gentlemen, here we go. Squeeze yourself around. We should have just made the whole thing. What did you do at the Rock Against Racism Carnival? Here we go. What's your name, sir?
My name is Tony Ridge.
And tell us your experience. Come over here so you're in shot.
I was 12.
Come over this way. Up on stage. Right, you have to come over here so you're in shot.
I was 12. I come from Jewish heritage, and my grandparents were at the Battle of Cable Street.
Wow.
My dad was a young communist, and when I was young, he said, "Right, we have to fight fascism."
Yeah.
And so,
Come over this way so you're in shot.
so basically, what happened was we had been at the Red Line Square clash, where Kevin Gately had got killed, and I was very young, and I remember this is before this, obviously. And I remember a policeman with lots of scrambled egg in his head saying, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm here to fight the fascists." And so we went on the whole march to Victoria Park, and when I got there, my dad put me on his shoulders, so I did see the bands. I don't remember them very well, to be honest with you, because I was having too much of a good time. And we carried on. He became the chair of the Anti-Nazi League for North West London, and he wrote lots of letters, which I have in scrapbooks.
What's his name?
His name is Lionel Rich. He's not very well known.
Lionel Richie.
Not Lionel Richie, although he did get phone calls from girls saying, "Are you Lionel Richie?" And I've got those letters reproduced in various newspapers, and he ended up writing letters against John Tyndall and Martin Webster, who were actually in correspondence with him. But then they got to know us, so we were getting death threats, so my mum said, "You have to stop." But I didn't stop.
All right. I think they might be the two happiest stories I've ever heard in my life. There's some questions. Who's got questions? Please, for Daniel and not for me. Okay, so what is your name?
Oh, Rosemary Antrobus.
Rosemary Antrobus. Tell us your experiences.
I was grown up. I went for the reggae music. There's an interesting episode as we pass Brick Lane where the National Front used to sell their papers and that every Sunday morning with the market on and everything. There was a particular more charismatic guy who was down there with these spotty-faced little, I shouldn't diss them, but they were little spotty-faced white youths following them. From that time, from that Sunday, I don't think they were ever there ever again. But I think reggae music was always in Hackney, being in Victoria Park. Reggae music's always been in Hackney, always been in London, but it's so significant to bring the current generation together in the two-tone thing, so people would go for the reggae music, as well as your Clash and what have you. But it's really significant that that was joined up, whereas Band-Aid wasn't. And we have to acknowledge Trafalgar Square and the concert that the black people of Hackney did, or the black people did, for Africa. And it's now celebrated outside the new Britannia Leisure Centre with the Cimarrons, or the guys that were there organising that concert. So it's a pattern that should be followed of inclusiveness and making sure that it will you bring everybody in.
Yeah.
Everyone likes reggae music actually, but they don't acknowledge how conscious that those words are.
Yeah.
Always has been. Yeah.
Thank you.
All I've got to say very quickly is my wife should be here, but she's not well. She was in a band in Brighton, a women's band in Brighton, who did something which is really interesting and reported in Temporary Hoarding. They pulled the plugs on a Rock Against Racism band called the Fabulous Poodles because of their lyrics. And so I just want to say that because it seems to me that Rock Against Racism was clearly an educative process, as well as a sort of celebratory and combative one politically. There was a lot of learning went on.
So the Fabulous Poodles kind of like, was it all sexist and thing?
Well, I don't remember much about it.
Yeah, they played on a bill with a...
They were quite typical. They weren't an unpleasant bunch of people.
They played on a bill with a band called Raped. And Lucy Whitman, who was part of the Rock Against Racism Committee, set up Rock Against Sexism to kind of highlight and bring out...
Bridget's still got the Rock Against Sexism badge. She's very proud of that. And you can read it in Temporary Hoarding, which I don't know if Temporary Hoarding's available online, but we've got a copy, and it's got a story, because they wrote a letter to Rock Against Racism to explain what they'd done and why. And she's, I think, rightly very proud of that.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
I do have a question. It's not directly about this. I missed this for various reasons, but I remember going to a lot of subsequent, quite big Rock Against Racism events, notably Jerry Dammer's Peter Gabriel on Clapham Common. And I'm just wondering, how long did it really keep going with that momentum?
Yeah.
At last, what have you to answer?
Yeah, I mean, Rock Against Racism finished in 1981 with a specials concert at Leeds, and then the Clapham Common was the biggest anti-apartheid demonstration to date in the world at that moment, and Jerry Dammers, who had formed the specials, set up British anti-apartheid and was responsible for that whole concert, which is incredible. And you know, I write about that and the people that were involved in the event. But unfortunately, as with many organisations, there was internal arguments within Rock Against Racism at the core, and so it couldn't sustain. But fortunately, the splinter groups of it around the country were able to do various parts and continue and do festivals, and then it went overseas, and people did it as far as New York. But yeah, the initial was 1981 it finished.
I think we're going to have to wrap up now because the next session is through. But thank you so much. It's been really exciting.